Welcome to Become the Leader, the show that equips you to rise higher, lead stronger, and become the leader you would follow. Hey guys, I'm Jody Holland, one of the co-hosts of the Become the Leader podcast. We're excited to be with you guys today. My background is in leadership development and executive coaching, and we'll get the rest of the team to introduce themselves.
Hi there, I'm Maleah Grigsby. My background is in community programming and engagement.
And I'm Megan Slaughter, and I have a background in communications, leadership, and psychology.
And rounding out this rebel bunch, I am Mike Grigsby. I am a recovering public sector CIO. I've been in technology for about 35 years and executive and business coaching for about the same amount of time. So this is a great opportunity for us to get our thoughts out to you.
So what's going to be exciting about this show is we're going to take this from a generational perspective. You've got two father-daughter combos here, all in business, all successful. Meghan is my daughter and Maleah is Mike's daughter. And it's interesting when you start thinking about the transitions in business and looking at the generations because each generation brings a unique set of values. Do a quick run through. Traditionalists were born 1922 to 1945, sometimes called the greatest generation. They were the World War II generation. They survived a lot of stuff. Great Depression, World War One, Korean War, World War II. Like you name it, they got beat down and got back up and kept going. Then along came the baby boomers, 1946 to 1964 for their birth years. Interestingly, those are the only birth years defined by the US government. Everything else, depending on where you read, you'll see a little bit of variation. But they were known as the innovative generation because they were very entrepreneurial, they pushed really hard, and they changed the roles of men and women in all aspects of relationship at work and outside of work. Then along comes Gen X, what some people call the middle generation, like the middle child of the generations. There's a shorter birth cycle, 1965 to 1980. They're the smallest generation in the history of the United States, and they are awesome. That is where the greatest music came from, in my opinion, because I am from that generation. And then after them came the millennials. Millennials were 1981 to about 1999, depending on where you read. It's anywhere from 95 to about 2000, but we'll put it right at 99. And with the millennial generation, the older millennials, the middle millennials, and the younger millennials really do not see eye to eye. It's three distinctive value structures. Things started to change really fast. Then along came Generation Z, started being born in about the year 2000 through about 2017. And if you think about this generation, they're coming into a world where there's been a lot of chaos, a lot of upheaval, a lot of change. And I think the difficult times from after 9/11, the housing crisis of 2008, as well as some of the other things that have struck us over the years, they really made them a pretty resilient generation. They were more protected in some cases by their parents, but in other cases, the parents really just said, look, you're going to have to sink or swim here. You're going to have to survive. So I think it's going to be an interesting conversation, really just talking about what it's like from one generation to the next and what it's like to work with family members. And so I know you've got some ideas on this, Maleah. Turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jody, for giving us the context behind there. I think it's interesting to think about how did we go from rub some dirt in it to now gentle parenting is the newest fad, and how does it look like? How do kids interact with their parents, and what does it look like to be taught by their parents in different ways? What not only do the parents teach us and their children, but how do us kids learn how to teach each other and our parents, and even the interaction of cross-generational, even skipping generations. What does it look like when we interact with our grandparents and aunts and cousins and all of those different things? And also, how does it influence being kids of some pretty neat parents that have paved the way in so many different ways in our community and in our areas? I'd love to hear, especially Megan and I, as we talk about what does it look like to be kids of dads who have made such a name for themselves in this space. What does it look like to make a name for ourselves now?
I think that's a big thing, and you're trying to prove yourself constantly in the workspace, but when you have somebody that goes before you, you especially want to stand on your own and make a name for yourself. But it's also important to recognize that a lot of the time you can use your network and use who you know to make those connections, and that's not a negative thing. It's not a crutch, but it's just a way for you to enter that space. And then once you're there, you can prove yourself and you show up and you do the work still. It's not that you are not, participating actively in the workspace. It's just sometimes you have that introduction and that can work to your advantage.
I do think that's interesting. Jump in anytime you want, Mike, on this, but you think about the network that you've built, the network that I've built over the last 30 or so years of being out there and being professionals in the workforce. I think it's a really valid point that who you know gets you in the door, but what you know keeps you there, and what you do keeps you there. And I think I did crack up on the rub some dirt on it because I'm thinking, man, I heard that one a lot.
I think that's what we were all told. There's a point that Malia made that I think is really important. As we think about how does one interaction kind of interact with the next generation, up or down, right? The generation before you, the generation after you. Recently, I got to spend 3 weekends in a row working on a model car with my oldest grandson. And what's interesting is I had to explain to him, first of all, that this is like involves glue and it's going to take time, and there's part like this is not a Lego set that we're going to get done in a certain amount of time. Like we really have to put this together. But what was also interesting was I found myself telling him, like, hey, you know what, it's been 40 years since I last did one of these. I'm gonna lower expectations and we're gonna talk about spending time together. Now, that's great for me and my generation as pawpaw going down to my grandson, but we don't have that same kind of mindset when it comes to the workforce, right? We don't look at the generation, that the older generations looking at the younger generation and say, you know what? I'm going to manage expectations. I've been doing this for a long time, but I don't know the new stuff. Let's just work on building our relationship so we can work together. No, it's so competitive. It feels like it's territorial. It feels like we're really pulling things out of each other, and we're creating so much friction in the workspace just around these generational differences. I'd be curious to hear, especially, from Meghan and Malia, as you're coming up into this, like, what does it feel like to bump up against that ceiling? I know certainly, Jody, you and I have done this. We've been in the workforce for 30 plus years, 35 years. What is it like for you all now coming in and bumping up against those kind of generational ceilings?
That's a great point. And when I was going through school, I had the opportunity of working in retail. One of my favorite things about retail is that I was working with 16-year-olds and 60-year-olds. So I kind of got to see how each generation interacted with one another. And I kind of used it as an experiment that I would be studying people and trying to understand them better. And I think that that applies to every industry, really, because you're seeing the different generations in the workforce. And, coming into this more professional space, I was really nervous and I kind of had a sense of imposter syndrome that I'm too young for this. They're not going to take me seriously. Who's going to listen to me or my advice on anything like this? And I kind of had to let go of that and just step into my role and say that I'm going to present this information and I think my words will speak for themselves. I don't necessarily have to fight for this. They'll either listen to me or they won't. Everyone has that choice. And it doesn't matter what age you are. I mean, you have the choice to listen to someone or ignore them and learn from one another. And Jody brought up, learning from the generations. We are teaching the older generations just as much as they are teaching us. And
I'm sure.
you have to learn the patience and understand that we're going to have different values. That doesn't mean that one generation is more lazy than the other. You just have to understand them better and work through that together.
I love that point so much. And I think to answer your question, it comes down to you have to be the change and you have to be the unconventional person in every room that you walk into. So my favorite technique is the ask me or tell me more. So I always ask the question, especially to older generations, or as I'm explaining something or they push back on something, oh, tell me more. Because clearly there's an experience that you went through, that there's a disconnect here. And I want to better understand that so I can help bridge that divide, not just for you and I to have a better relationship, but that you might be able to better understand someone that's coming from a similar background as I am in the future to set yourself up better for success, not just myself.
And you think about the what you just said about the experience. We do all have these experiences that shape us. And what you were describing there is it's the story behind the experience that creates the meaning. And from a psychological perspective, there nothing that we experience is real. It's just the story we make up about it that becomes real. So as we're going through something, we're going, oh, this means this. So from each generation had a, oh, this is what this means kind of experience. And they were mapping out and going, well, I know because I went through this, this is what's going on in my world. And I think that's where we get overly caught up at times is thinking I went through something that nobody else has gone through. And I know I joke around about how hard we worked and that kind of stuff when I was a kid. And in some ways, I actually wonder if my dad did walk barefoot uphill both ways in the snow every day to school and that kind of stuff because I've heard actual stories from other people about what life was like in the late 1940s and 1950s. I'm like, holy cow. Like I'm not sure
Yeah,
the Xers would have survived that,
yeah, right.
but we went through our own stuff and I started working early because I wanted to. Not really because my parents made me. I liked money. And if you didn't
Wait,
work, you didn't get money.
it's funny, Jody. It's when you say you wanted to work early. I know for me that kind of work, whether it was a paper route, whether it was mowing lawns, whether it was, my very first job at 8 years old was a barbershop valet, dusting people off when they got out of the chair. Like that represented freedom. It
Yeah.
represented a sense of responsibility. Hey, I'm now accountable for something, and it gave me I'm earning, right? So now I'm incentivized to do this. But but the older we get, certainly I know my generation, and as I became a parent, I was like, I'm not going to allow you to cross the street on your own. I'm not going to let you go on a bike ride for 8 hours and me not know where you are. Right? We
The
we kind of
rifle.
started to hobble. We started to hobble our kids from the same experience and kind of prevent them from having the same experiences that we did. Now, obviously, the world, some of the world dictated that, right? It did get a little bit more dangerous, but it makes me wonder, and for Malia and Megan, I'd love to hear your thoughts on like how challenging was it to try to find a sense of identity or try to find a sense of adventure when you had helicopter parents the whole time? Like, no, you can go be adventurous. Just check in every five
Not
minutes
out of
and
my
make sure your
eyesight.
find my iPhone is turned on.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I would not have wanted to go to college at the time when my daughters went to college because we check that Find My iPhone regularly. Like, where are they? It is 10:30 p.m. Why are they not back at the dorm yet?
What's it like being that kind of, I don't know, monitored as you grow up?
Well, and what's interesting too is I think about when I have kids, what am I going to be like? Because even when I was younger, I knew my parents were watching and we lived across the street from the school and there was a playground and every now and then I would look over at our house and I could see them out with the binoculars and they were watching us climb trees. We still got into some crazy things, but they definitely were making sure that we were safe and accounted for, which is a great thing. But again, it's kind of a difference from the previous generations that, we had cell phones earlier, so they could follow us and check in on us. And, you had to make it home by, an actual time and not just when the street lights went off or came on.
Very different.
I I also think, adventure looked different for us, where it's like we created our own kind of adventure, where I can tell you every name of every fairy that was in my fairy garden from age 7 to age 10. Like, and I made mud pies for every single one of them, and they helped. And like, it was a different sense of adventure where I was I was the last kid. I was more of the daredevil. All the things, right? I always push the limits, push the envelope in every way possible. And I'm surprised that my dad's not like, yeah, for sure. But it was completely different where we created our own sense of adventure and freedoms and everything. Actually, one of my fondest memories from when I was little was going to visit you guys in down there. And I remember when we got to go bike ride to the school by ourselves, and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like our parents aren't here. Oh my gosh. Like it was crazy to me.
Yeah, all the way
Yes.
across the street.
Well, and that's also, we were introduced to technology very early on, but it wasn't as much of a thing as it is now. So I look at my younger cousins and family members, and they play video games every day, and that's their fun activity that they do after school. But we still wanted to go ride bikes. And yes, I played with mud pies constantly. And I'm sure that, my
You
parents thought
made
I would
all,
become a scientist when I was older because I was always experimenting with these
yeah.
magic potions with lotion and grass and glitter and just random
We
things.
would find the most random combinations of stuff under the sink. I'm like, what is this? And then Megan would be like, don't touch that. It needs to cure.
And it was fun and we had that adventure. And I hope that kids are still getting to do that more and more now, in addition to the technology, because technology, I think, is to our advantage, but we shouldn't rely on it for everything.
Yeah. I
You,
think there's
you know,
limits there.
I think the part, and I love the way you said that, Megan, is that the adventure looked different, right? It was still adventure, but it looked different, and I think that's really really important, and especially for those generations, or certainly when you two have your own families, what does that look like for your kids, and creating the safety bubble around it, right? For us growing up, the safety bubble was the neighborhood. Right, we knew our parents knew our neighbors like all the way out 4 or 5 blocks. They knew, and they had this kind of parental network where they could, like hit the jungle drums or something and like send us home, whatever the case is,
Honk and whistle.
without yelling the whistle, right? But more and more that safety net began to close down until now it's, you're monitored on your own phone. I think the part about adventure, and I'm curious, I want everybody to weigh in on this. I think the part about adventure that's important, not only for our personal lives, but in the workplace, is this idea of exposure, right? The more things you get exposed to, you begin to kind of change even just your neural pathways. And Jody, I know you can talk more about that, right? But this notion of exposure, you begin to start to see what else is out there, right? We talk about expanding your worldview, or beginning to think about this. We don't, by and large, most organizations don't create a safe space, or dare I even say, don't encourage that type of exposure and that kind of adventuring out there, right? We look for systems that keep it closed, that keep it effective, efficient, and economical. But we miss that fourth E, which is experiential. And that's the part where real innovation comes from. So I'm just curious, what's everybody else's thoughts around this idea or this notion of exposure?
I do think you're right that, like, if you go from a generational perspective, what people had access to be exposed to was very minimal, really, until about Gen X. Because with Generation X, that was when cable came out. So one of my one of the quotes, I can't remember if it was you, Malia, or maybe it was your other daughter, Mike, that said, "Dad, someday there's going to be 1,000 channels and still nothing on."
Right.
But you think about that idea of that adventure was what's going on in the rest of the world. I mean, we knew what was going on in our neighborhood, but we didn't really know until about junior high that, oh my gosh, there's other stuff in the country. And then you look at the millennial generation, Gen Z, you know what's going on everywhere in the world. Like, you can pick up your phone and you are connected to the world without any issue whatsoever. So I do think that the the space for adventure is much larger than what it used to be. And dreaming of what could be was Encyclopedia Britannica, 1984. So it's very different, but I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Like, what do you think about the adventure side of things?
I think it's really fascinating that we have access to all of these resources within the workplace, and that's really helpful. But in school, our teachers would constantly tell us, you're not going to have a calculator, you're not going to have an encyclopedia to look these things up. And we absolutely did. And, we have a calculator at our fingertips on our phones. So we get to use these, and I don't think that it limits us. I actually just think it helps expand our reach, that access to these things and we're using them to our advantage. And I think in a way we have learned how to use our resources even better because of that. And we're still adventuring and learning on our own, but we have those resources at our fingertips.
Yeah. Your thoughts, Malia?
Yeah, I just still am such like I can tend to be really cautious, and so I still feel so cautious around this that I don't believe that we're designed to know all of the things going on at one single time in any area of the world or even outside of Earth at this point. So I still feel like there was a beauty before in just knowing what's happening in your circle and in your community and how it's made up of different perspectives and experiences within your smaller community. I think about now with when you scroll on Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is, that you have an auto-generated feed that only is typically is only feeding you one source of truth or one side of the truth or whatever that is, where yes, you have a broader, in a sense, a broader worldview, but at the same time, it can actually be tend to make you even more narrow-minded. So what does it look like? How do you get those differing perspectives in a good, healthy way that's not calling the other side names, that's not saying that or putting other people down, but how do you get it in a way that when you're in a neighborhood, you have one single thing that brings everyone together. And that's the sense that this is our community, this is our neighborhood that we're going to come together to protect. It doesn't matter if you're left, right, whatever your ethnical background is, no matter what, we're coming together because we agree that this is a sacred place. What is our common ground now? Is it too broad to, I mean, at this point, it feels like it's even hard to say that this is our nation that we want to be proud of, or this is our job title, or this is our whatever it is to be proud of and come together to protect. So I feel, I don't know, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it kind of is. And what I see in your generation, or what I feel like I'm witnessing in your generation, is this resurgence of traditionalized values, of coming back to, I do love America, I do love freedom, I know who I am as a person, I'm confident in who I am, and I'm not going to be pushed around. And I feel like going through the millennial generation, they went through a lot of stuff of really just being beat down if they ever disagreed with anything. And then all of a sudden, like the next generation comes along and goes, look, they're going to hate us anyway. So let's just be who we are. And I think that's the power that is coming back with the generation, is that your voice is stronger than what it ever was before, and your self-confidence is better than it ever was before. And
Yeah.
I think that's very much a positive thing.
Yeah.
And then last thing I want to kind of just hit real quick is just round robin. Like, what is thinking about lessons you learned or lessons you feel like you've taught the generation? What is one lesson you either learned or you shared with a parent that you feel like made the world a little bit better place? Mike, I want to get you to go first on this one.
Yeah, I think I have to tip my hat to Malia and her generation because it's challenging, right? I grew up in a time I'm a Gen Xer by age, but my father was a greatest generation, so I kind of grew up as a boomer with that kind of mindset. And it was, from the standpoint of like children are meant to be seen, not heard, right? If I wanted your opinion, I would have asked for it or I would have given it to you, kind of thing, right? And flip that to my daughter, my youngest daughter, who she said already, she pushed the envelope, she challenged, pushed down to everything, and it forced me to say, well, she has a voice. That's a good point. That's a valid point. That's not a just do what I say instead of do what I do. So I would say, the biggest challenge for me is just allowing myself to to kind of supersede my own limitations and really start to contemplate things as they are, not as I need them to be.
Yeah, makes sense. Maleah, what about you?
It kind of sounds contradictory, but it's actually in agreement with what you said, that one of the things that I'm most grateful that I've learned from you is that I don't actually have to take anything at face value. Not saying that I have to push back on everything, but just not taking things the first go around, saying, I can do my own research on this. I can ask people that are subject matter experts around this idea. And I can take all of my experiences, all of these narratives that I'm putting together, and I can create my own truth for myself and help others come to their own truths as well.
Excellent. All right, Meg, I know that the internet's in and out just a little bit, but what's a lesson you've learned or a lesson you've taught?
I think one of the greatest lessons I have learned is learning to listen to myself and lean into my own personal values. I don't
Mhm.
have to give in to everything that someone else says. And I do have a voice and I can kind of push back in a respectful manner. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to listen to what you have to say or what your words of encouragement are. But I know me, I know myself, I know my mind, and at the end of the day, I know that I can rely on myself, even when maybe I have some thoughts of doubt. You know, I have prepared myself and I'm going to be able to move forward and just take what I have learned from other people and apply it to everything that I do and give it my all.
Excellent. I'm going to round
I
it out
like it.
with something that I believe Mike will definitely agree that is me. The lesson I try to teach my kids is go screw some stuff up. And the reason that that was the lesson
Yes.
is like, what are you going to talk about when you're old if you did everything correct?
Right.
Take
Right.
some risk, mess some stuff up, get kicked out of a concert. I don't know. I mean, I got kicked out of church and church camp. So,
Yes.
like, you got to go mess some stuff up because it teaches you how to deal with conflict and deal with stress and deal with things like that. But this is a great first go on this
Yeah.
season of Become the Leader. I'm very excited for what is to come. Give you a little quick format here. We will have some guests on here from time to time. We'll typically try to get somebody in a business that needs a problem solved, and we'll put them in the hot seat, solve the problem as we go. We'll also talk about some really relevant topics for what's going on in the world around us. Everything from succession planning to shifts in population to just about anything else related to leadership in any industry. So, again, I'm Jody Holland with Mike Grigsby, Maleah Grigsby, and Meghan Slaughter. Thank you guys for joining us. Make sure that you give us a like, give us a subscribe, and make sure you share this with your friends. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks for joining Become the Leader. Keep growing forward and become the leader you would follow.